Okay, so Chairman, we're now live and we can start the meeting, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a virtual meeting of the Pensions Committee of the London Borough of Hillingdon. This is a virtual meeting and is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. My name is Martin Goddard. I'm the Councillor for, I beg your pardon, I'm the Chairman for this meeting. A few housekeeping points, please, before we start. Please ensure that any mobile phones around are on silent. Please keep microphones muted when not speaking and then unmute to speak. Only one person should speak at any time, and I as Chairman will call on those to speak and will keep an eye on the room through my gallery view to those indicating. Before we move on to the agenda, I'd like to do a roll call of everyone present. Please indicate if you are present when I say your name. Councillor Philip Cawthorne.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Edgington.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Raymond Graham.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor John Moore.
Present.
Thank you very much. We'll now do the same thing with the officers who are present. Paul Wayman, Corporate Director of Finance.
Present.
Thank you, Paul. James Lake, Chief Accountant.
Present.
Thank you. Yvonne Thompson-Hoyt, Interim Manager, Pension Fund.
Present.
Thank you. Tunde Adekoya, Pension Fund Accountant.
Present.
Thank you. And Liz Penny, Democratic Services Officer.
Present.
Thank you very much. Now turning to the members of the Pension Board who are present. Hayley Seabrook.
Present.
Thank you very much. And Roger Hackett.
Present.
Thank you. And finally, the external advisors, Claire Scott, Investment Advisor.
Present.
Thank you. Andrew Singh, representing ISIO.
Present.
Thank you very much. Suresh Patel of EY.
Present.
Thank you. And Larissa Midoni, also of EY.
Present.
Thank you. In terms of technical meeting control, if any councillor leaves the virtual meeting partway through for a period of time, for example, for a lost connection, I will continue the meeting unless we are not quorate, which is 3 councillors. Importantly, any councillor who does leave the meeting for a period of time will not be able to vote on the item that they were not present for. So if we then turn to the agenda for the meeting, firstly, any apologies for absence, please?
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting, please? Philip. Philip, can you hear me?
Yes, just giving my standard declaration as a deferred member of the speaker.
Thank you very much. Tony, I think probably you as well?
Yes, I'm a retired member of the pension fund.
Thank you very much. Minutes of meetings. We actually have 2 meetings to deal with. First of all, the minutes of the meeting of the committee, which took place on the 29th of January 2020. Are there any matters arising from members in connection with those minutes? Okay, so I think we can take those as approved. And then also the meeting of the 14th of May 2020. Any matters arising with those? That one's pretty straightforward, I think. Okay, thank you. So we can accept those as approved. To make it clear, we have a number of items which are labelled as part 1 for this agenda, and those matters will be dealt with in public. The items set out in part 2 of the agenda will be dealt in private, and the YouTube channel will be cut at that point. So moving then to item 5 of the agenda, the question of the audit of the accounts and the annual report. May I just suggest that there is a set of draft accounts which are appended to the pack. If any of the members of the committee have any comments or questions about those draft accounts, may I suggest that those comments or questions are emailed to either James or Tunde outside this meeting please. So with that, if I may turn to Suresh to give us the progress report on the audit process, please.
Thank you, Chair. So our report starts on your page 43 of the pack. And as we highlight there, this is an interim audit results report in light of the timing of this committee. Our audit is currently in progress. I'll just give you a quick overview, and then I'm going to ask Larissa to pull out the key items of detail that we think you should be aware of. So we issued our audit plan for the 1920 accounts back in February, and clearly since then we have had to take into account the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on your financial reporting in terms of preparation of the pension fund accounts, and then in terms of our audit of the accounts. I think firstly it's worthwhile saying that I think I've been pretty impressed with how the finance team have continued to function in terms of preparing a good set of accounts and working papers, despite having to work remotely and despite the additional pressures that they're clearly under in terms of additional duties that they've been undertaking over the past 3 or 4 months. And we valued the cooperation that they've provided to our teams in terms of being able to carry out the audit remotely. As I said, the audit is currently in progress. It's fair to say the kind of main impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on financial reporting have been around, firstly around property valuations, which Larissa will explain in a bit more detail, but that's all linked to the volatility of the property market as at the 31st of March 2020, and you've obviously got a significant amount of pooled property investments. And then disclosures relating to the impact of COVID-19. So that includes a kind of going concern disclosure, which is probably quite unusual for a pension fund to have to think about going concern. But in light of, like I said, the impact of the pandemic on asset values, on investment returns, etc., then you will see in the draft accounts there is now a disclosure around going concern, but also then about events after the balance sheet date in terms of has there been any significant impact on those values post balance sheet. You'll also notice that the timetable for your accounts preparation and publishing audited accounts has been changed by MHCLG as a result of the pandemic. So you did have to the end of August, to prepare your draft accounts, whilst you have produced them earlier than that. And the deadline for publishing your audited accounts is the 30th of November this year. And then just to highlight the fact that one of the responses that EY has made in respect of the impact of pandemic is a stronger focus on ensuring that the audit reports that we issue on accounts are giving the right opinion. As I mentioned, the impact on things like property valuations and going concern disclosures means that we are likely to include in our audit report what we call emphasis of matter paragraphs, which is, just to be clear, is not a modification, is not a qualification, but it is highlighting to the reader of the accounts where we think there are disclosures that are important to aid their understanding of the accounts. I'll ask Larissa now to take you through some of the key details in our report.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start on page 5 of our report, which you should have received from Elizabeth on the 24th of July as a separate attachment. So if I can just walk you through pages 5 and 6, which are basically key and summarizing where we stand at the moment, and just reinforce some of the messages that Suresh initiated. So with respect to our risk assessment as a result of COVID-19, as Suresh mentioned, valuation of investments was a key area of focus. We did have a significant risk in this respect prior to COVID-19. However, COVID-19 just emphasized the risk in relation to the pooled property funds. So as you might have heard, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors issued a statement that a material uncertainty paragraph will show up in valuation reports of underlying property investments. So from our side, we have to and we are considering the impact on valuation of the investments that the fund holds. Moving on to disclosures, ongoing concern and events after the balance sheet date, we identify these as additional inherent risks. And Suresh just emphasized what we are doing in that respect. With respect to the changes in scope of how we're performing our audit, just to emphasize that we had to undertake additional inquiries to understand the impact of COVID-19 on significant classes of transactions and internal controls. Also, with respect to the investments, we had to undertake additional work with respect to the disclosures around uncertainty of valuation and just challenging how the valuations are performed. With respect to changes in materiality, you'll see certain changes which are due to the final amounts being available to us at this point versus the planning stage we communicated earlier this year. So the basis has not changed. We reconsidered our levels in light of COVID-19, and we concluded that the basis and the range selected is still appropriate. Moving on to the next page, just to emphasize some additional audit procedures we had to undertake as a result of the pandemic. The way we treated the information produced by the entity, we just had to increase the scrutiny by using Microsoft Teams and using, in some cases, additional third-party confirmations. And with respect to the consultation requirements, we're still undergoing this process. So we will be in communication with management to inform what this means for our conclusion on the audit. Just a more detailed status of the audit can be found on page 6. And just to emphasize here that there's a significant amount of work that we have undertaken with respect to the triennial review of the pensions data, and this is still undergoing. I'm not going to go in much detail. You have it, the list detailed in the report, and subject to all the information being made available to us in due time, we're hoping and aiming to finalize the audit by the time of the audit committee on the 1st of October. And yep.
Yeah, so just a final thing then, Chair, was just to highlight on your page 61, which is our page 19 of the report, where we talk about the fees. Just again, just to be transparent about the fees. I think I've talked to the committee before about the sustainability of the audit market and pressure on audit work in terms of increased requirements of regulation. We have shared with the Section 151 officer proposals to increase the base fee, and that's also been shared with public sector audit appointments, so that's an ongoing discussion. But you also see in that table there, we do highlight that there'll be additional fees in relation to the additional work that we're required to do on the triennial valuation this year, which is obviously every 3 years, and then the internal consultation and all that goes with that as well will necessitate an additional fee, which we'll obviously discuss in detail with the Section 151 officer before we bring it back to the committee. We'll stop there, Chair, and happy to take questions. Okay.
Suresh and Larissa, very much for that. Do any of the committee members have any questions for EY on what you presented? Philip, please go ahead.
It's a question I'm always fond of asking, I think, to the lay people among us, of which I have to say I'm one. I think language is an important thing, and there's a lot of quite technical information here. I think what's sometimes missing in these situations is just a summary in everyday language. We are broadly in the right place, doing the right things. And when I look at page 19 of the agenda, we're looking at the bottom paragraph there. We're talking about balances cannot be determined with certainty. Actual results will be materially different from assumptions and estimates. Just understanding whether that's the sort of phrase we generally expect to see in this sort of situation, should we be particularly concerned about that? Just really a feel for what it is we're being presented in everyday language would be useful, I think, from my perspective anyway. Thank you.
Can I just clarify what page you're referring to in terms of those statements?
Right, okay. This is the notes to the pension fund account. So I've got page 19 of the main agenda. I've also got 115 on it as well.
I think that's probably a more appropriate question for officers, Chair, in terms of the content of the actual pension fund accounts.
Yeah, this is section judgments and uncertainties. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for me to answer, but I would have said that that sort of wording is fairly typical. Perhaps I could ask either James or Paul to comment on that, please.
Sorry, yeah, that is standard wording, and it sort of it just allows the fact that these are not definite answers here. There are uncertainties and judgments when we pull in the accounting figures. So there will be judgments on, for example, the future cash flows of property funds. There will be estimations and uncertainties around that. So it's just to say it's not a definite sort of 100% answer. There will be uncertainties and judgments when applying the oversight to these numbers by the fund managers.
Okay, that's you. I think we just needed to hear that. So thank you. That's good.
Thank you, Philip. Any other questions for EY, please? I'm not seeing any indication. So Suresh and Larissa, many thanks for your update. Clearly, it will be coming back to the October meeting when we should have very much more substantial progress. So thank you. I think no need for us to detain you any longer in the meeting, but thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening.
Thank you.
Okay. So the one thing that we then have to do with this section is to note as a resolution EY's interim report on the audit of the pension fund. Can I just check whether any of the committee members wish to disagree with that as a resolution we might adopt? I'm not seeing any dissent, so we can get that resolution adopted, please. Okay, so the next item that we have to deal with is the ratification of delegated decisions. That's item number 6. James, can I throw this over to you, please?
Yeah, thank you. Back in March, Democratic Services advised that the pension committee would be cancelled due to COVID-19, and going forward, the corporate director of finance would have delegated authority to take decisions in consultation with committee members and the leader. During the period between March and July, 3 decisions were made. 1, the suspension of the abatement policy for 12 months. 2, the approval of the triennial valuation and funding strategy statement. And 3, the award of the contract for actuarial services. Now, committee have previously reviewed the specified reports and commented where appropriate. All we're doing now is just asking that those decisions be formally ratified by Pensions Committee.
Thank you, James. So just to repeat what James has said, we were given as a committee the opportunity to consider those decisions taken by Paul at the time. Can I just ask if anybody has any further questions on those decisions, or whether we can move straight to a confirmation or a ratification of those decisions? Any questions, please? I'm not seeing any. So the resolution is that the committee will ratify the 3 delegated decisions taken by the corporate director of finance. Are we in agreement with that, please? Thank you very much. Okay, so passed. So we then turn to item 7 which is investment strategy and fund manager performance. James, I think I will turn this over to you with assistance or input from advisors where required, please.
Thank you, Councillor Goddard. This paper presents the performance of the fund and its managers for the quarter ending the 31st of March 2020. At the end of March, the fund value was 989 million, a fall of 137 million from the December's 1.126 billion valuation. The reduction was obviously due to the impact of COVID-19, as March was basically the height of market disruption. Since then, the fund has recovered somewhat, and as at the end of June, it now stands at 1.069 billion, so recouping £80 million of that loss. I did a quick check this morning, and as of today, it's pretty much unchanged, so it's actually 1.068 billion, so it's sort of stabilised slightly around that figure. Performance over the quarter ending March was minus 2.67, so 2.67 behind the benchmark. I do need to apologise. In the actual report, the portfolio returns and benchmark returns have been transposed. So the actual portfolio return was minus 11.77 and the benchmark was minus 9.1%. 1 year figures showed a return of minus 6.1%, falling behind the benchmark of minus 3.5. Longer term numbers showed positive returns, but again, all behind the benchmark, unfortunately. We've just recently got some performance figures for June, so just to bring those numbers slightly more up to date. June's quarter performance was plus positive 8.04%, however, that's still 1% behind the benchmark. The 1 year figure has reduced and is now at minus 1.76 against the benchmark of positive 2.29. As you can see, there's sort of underperformance pretty much across all periods, and the biggest contributors to those underperformances are UBS and the LSIV Income Fund, also known as EPOC. I think we're going to discuss UBS and EPOC in part 2, so I won't sort of dwell on that too much at the moment. Another large detractor was AEW, the property manager, and as sort of just previously mentioned by Ewa, a lot of the property funds have been marking down their asset valuations, so that's just AEW put in a sort of contingency for the asset values and have made quite a large markdown on their asset valuations. The main updates on the investment portfolio are there was £50 million allocation to long lease property was finally drawn down. That's taken over a year, I think, to actually from our commitment to actually them being able to put money in the ground. But that's now drawn down and the commitment is now fully funded. We've also rebalanced the index-linked gilts to match the duration of scheme liabilities, and this will also help reduce some of the risk if the RPI index is removed. If anybody has any questions, then I'm happy to answer them, or the advisors.
Thank you, James. Any questions for James on the summary? John.
I just wanted to ask a question about the rougher absolute return. Have we actually drawn all this money down now? I'm not clear on that from the report I'm looking at. It may be me not misunderstanding something. Was that understood?
Yeah. What happened? We have drawn some money for rougher. Some of the money to fund the long lease property was taken from rougher, but a lot of the money is still sitting with rougher, and that's waiting to be deployed into the infrastructure fund.
Right. Thank you.
So we still have quite a bit in rougher, but we have used some of it.
Right.
Thank you. Any other questions on this segment? I'm not seeing anything. I mean, perhaps James, if I could offer a comment. I think for me, the most significant thing about this portfolio performance really goes back to the comments that EY were making, in that whilst we can be pretty confident of where we are in terms of the, shall we call them the liquid assets, but if you look at the real assets, the real estate, the infrastructure assets, and probably actually the corporate debt that we're holding, Only the passage of time will tell just how accurately they're valued by fund managers at the moment. Would you agree with that?
I would certainly agree in the level 3 type investments, as they call them, where there aren't sort of specific indices. So we know with the equities, they're listed on the FTSE 100 or the MSCI, etc. And even the corporate bonds, to be honest, will be listed on certain indices. So those prices are known, they're published, and everybody can see them. So those would be accurate. It's where the fund manager's making assumptions on future cash flows. So as you say, the property, for example, future rents, private equity, infrastructure, all of those things, the valuation will have some uncertainties and judgments on those valuations. And as you say, the test of time will see how accurate they are. But I guess as we move forward, different things will change, and then the valuation will change to reflect that. So in December, for example, the situation might be completely different. So the valuation in December won't necessarily reflect the valuation at the end of March. So, but yes, there is uncertainty on those type of investments.
Thank you. Okay. Any more questions for James and the advisory team on the summary of the portfolio? We will have an opportunity to get into some of the points of detail in the part 2 segment of the meeting, of course. Okay, so the resolution for this agenda item is that the committee notes the update on fund performance. Are we content to accept that, committee? Thank you very much. Okay, so if we then move on to item 8 of the agenda, which is the investment strategy statement combined with the COVID-19 review. And so once again, James, if I can pass this to you, please.
Thank you very much. Following a triennial valuation, a revised funding strategy statement is produced. This was approved under delegated authority and ratified earlier in the agenda today. Following on from those two activities, the next stage is to update your investment strategy statement. This has been done, and the updated investment strategy statement reflects the revised asset allocation to meet the objectives of the funding strategy statement. In addition, as Councillor Goddard has just mentioned, we also carried out or commissioned a review of the strategy due to COVID-19 to ascertain whether it was still fit for purpose. The outcome of that review was the strategy had defensive qualities which should help protect against downside, whilst it also was able to deliver the required returns in the funding strategy statement. So ultimately, ISIO's review said that there was no real change required to the strategy. I should also point out another key update in the strategy relates to the outcome of the Supreme Court decision in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which basically says that pension funds no longer need to adhere to UK foreign and defence policies, whereas before it said you had to abide by those policies. Now you don't have to, basically. So what we've done is we've updated the wording in the investment strategy statement to show now we give consideration to those policies rather than adhering to them. Officers are also requesting that we apply this wording to other pension policies, primarily the responsible investment policy, where that phrase is also included. Excuse me. Also got some other dates on the proposed updates, on the proposed investment strategy. Claire informed me today that I was using some old terminology in terms of corporate bonds. So on page 43, I'm requesting that we actually change that to diversified credit. And also on page 44, we should remove the reference to the SID Investment Advisory Committee. So other than that, I'll now pass back to the Chair for any comments.
James, thank you for that. Can I throw it open to the committee for any questions? Philip.
Sorry, James, could you just clarify your very last point about what we're removing in relation to the SID? I didn't quite catch that.
It has a reference to the Investment Advisory Committee. That's being removed.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? John.
On page 116, you make the statement the fund currently holds a considerable portion of the liquid assets. And then you comment on the fact that the cost of exiting these strategies would have a negative financial impact on the fund. Now, I'm assuming we're not talking about infrastructure we've just gone into. Does this refer to property or private credit? Is that clear? Yeah.
Yep. The idea of the liquid funds is you invest in them over the long term. So you'll put something in there and you will expect it to yield a return over a number of years or grow, for example, in private equity. So you invest at the start and you're hoping these companies are going to grow and grow and grow. If you choose to exit, we're not choosing to do that now necessarily, but if you choose to exit any of these before they get to their maturity, there will be a hit. So I guess in very simple terms, if you had a sort of a 2-year fixed bond and you wanted to try and sell it after 1 year, there will be penalties to come out of that. But the idea is we don't want to sell it after 2, we want to keep it to its maturity.
Yeah, I think just to add a comment to that, John, if I may, I think that when you have liabilities which extend out over something like 30 years, it's perfectly reasonable to have illiquid assets as the, if you like, as the ballast in a fund. And provided you've got, I mean, you and I exchanged emails on this. Provided we have a balance of decent liquidity in the fund in terms of our current cash flow, that's probably quite an acceptable thing. I don't know whether advisors would agree with that. They're nodding sagely. That's great.
Absolutely, it's clear here. Absolutely, you should be looking for an additional return because of that illiquidity, and that's ideal for a pension fund where you don't need to realise your assets, all your assets at one time.
Thank you. Thank you. I do have a question for Andrew. Actually, as ISIO were the authors of the COVID update. Andrew, it does seem to me that the pandemic really is potentially going to turn out to be something of a sea change for many of us in terms of both our personal and working lives. And there really is, I would imagine, the potential for quite fundamental changes ahead in terms of property portfolios in particular. And I appreciate it's very difficult to second guess these, when we're not really out of the pandemic yet. Do you see a situation where actually we may have to go back and recalibrate the asset allocation as and when we see the ways in which the investment property market is starting to move?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair comment. It's hard to see a kind of area of life or sector that the kind of pandemic hasn't affected in some way. Thinking particularly of property portfolios, so the key areas that we've been focusing on in terms of our monitoring and getting a handle of how they'll be affected is the retail and the office sectors. They're probably the two most standout that could be affected. Just at a high level, why that could be is that retail, from speaking with the various investment managers, there was a trend towards more e-commerce type retail, so people buying more stuff online, and that was adversely impacting high street and the take-up of high street space. That's not true for all retail. So, for instance, one of the things we saw from the pandemic was supermarkets and more kind of out-of-town retail tending to do a bit better. And then for office spaces, I think people are talking of a trend of people working from home more. So will that affect the take-up and demand for office space? So as you say, it's difficult to really pinpoint the effects on those two sectors and the wider property market at the minute, given it's almost seeing how this plays out and how long it could last for. But there are some more short-term kind of concerns, and looking at those various sectors in property. What we've typically seen the managers doing, and the funds investment managers as well, is working collaboratively with the underlying tenants. So the investment managers and the funds own these properties and collect rent from the tenants that rent them off them.
they instead of they've been very kind of collaborative in their approach. So reforming the rent clauses, giving tenants a break during the periods that the various activities were closed down. So that's a good thing. I think both parties see that from a long-term point of view as a positive and good way forward. Our general view would be that we've had a relatively strong run in property markets over the past few years. So a combination of capital growth and income has driven the returns and led to positive returns for the fund. That's more likely going to be driven by income and a bigger component of income and the rental income going forward. So the key is to have that sustainable income and managers who are good at collecting that and have a portfolio robust with income.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Andrew. I mean, can I suggest? I mean, clearly this can't be done within necessarily the format of the strategic asset allocation, but given some of the uncertainties maybe that we do have with property, and I would suggest also with infrastructure assets going forward, that these are areas that we keep under fairly constant review. You know, to the extent that if not being terms coming through, we may need to recalibrate the allocation at a future date if we see signs that point us in that direction.
Yep. Okay,
thank you. Any other questions for James or Claire or Andrew whilst we're on this section? No, I'm not seeing anything. So we have two resolutions here, and these are slightly more formal because we are actually approving them. So I do need a proposer and a seconder. The first is that we approve the draft investment strategy statement, including the observation from 19 arising from the review carried out by our advisors. And the second is that we note and approve the amended reference to UK foreign and defence policies in all fund documentation, and in particular our adopted responsible investment. Can I seek? I've got a proposer for that, Philip. Thank you, and a seconder.
I'll second.
Thank you, Tony. Committee, are we all good with that, please?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so those are approved. May we now please move on to the administration report. So Yvonne, this is one for you, I think, please.
Thank you, Councillor Goddard. This report mainly looks at how Surrey, who provides our administration service, how they have performed against key performance indicators. It also looks at membership uptake of the self-service, and there's also updates on ongoing projects and a decision that the committee is being asked to make. Uptake of membership is the usual steady increase in uptake, but still a long way to go. In terms of performance, there are two separate performances. Due to COVID-19, the pensions regulator has asked that focus be put on paying of benefits, paying of death grants, and that other items like transfers. Apologies for that noise in the background. I'm in the office. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that other payments like transfers be put on hold. Now on page 152, I think we can see that major table in the middle, that there has been ongoing decline in the key performance indicators in this area. A lot of it is due to staff being diverted to other areas, and also staff shortages at Surrey. they have filled a few key positions, but there are still main positions that still need to be filled in order to bring the performance up, and also staff working remotely and not having full access. On page 153, it goes on to talk about staffing and resources. And I think a key highlight here is that the head of pensions, the recently appointed head of pensions, has resigned. And this is a key position that was also driving through the changes and to drive the performance up. And that position remains unfilled at this time. It is of concern and has been added to the risk register. We'll also look at a few projects. There were the deferred member address tracing project. And this one was mainly a success. It was a lot of addresses that were missing for deferred members, and that process has yielded a 92% positive result. And all of that data has now been updated in the system. And also in terms of pension overpayments, I'll go into this one in detail because it has a decision attached to it. Over the years, there has been an ongoing list of overpaid pensions. These occur as a result of, it's a time lapse between when a death has been notified to Surrey in order for them to stop the pension, so additional pensions get paid out. Now, many of these have been recovered, but in quite a few instances, especially where there is no estate, it has been very difficult to recover these. And, weighing up the benefits against the costs, the amounts, a lot of them are negligible, and it would not be beneficial to the fund to pursue recovery of them. And in many cases, there isn't a legitimate person to recover it from. So in the past, it has been agreed that amounts up to £100 could be written off, but we are now asking for that amount to be increased to £200. That any amount up to £200, we're asking that the threshold be increased to write those amounts off. And we'd also like to highlight that it won't be just an automatic, as soon as an amount comes up, we just write it off. Reasonable attempts will be made to recover the funds. And if not, then it will be put to the corporate director of finance to agree the write-off. And I think that's the end of the report. There are a few additional reports giving the detail of the data tracing.
Okay.
And that's the end of the report. Thank you.
Yvonne, thank you for that. Just one small point of clarification from me before I throw it open to members. Would I be correct in saying that whilst the data improvement project has been successful in the areas that it's been focused on, there probably is scope to widen the ambit of that project to take in other areas? Would you agree with that?
Oh yes. There are definitely other areas that are going on.
Yes.
Under the data improvement. There was a recent ITM report. Apologies, I forgot that one. That one is to do looking at the backlog. There's a huge backlog of data, mainly pertaining to like what they call frozen refunds. These are people who have left the fund but not with enough service to qualify for a benefit. So they need to refund the money. But where the backlog has occurred is when the care scheme was introduced in 2014, they changed the period that qualifies for benefit from 3 months to 2 years. Now, it wasn't changed going forward. So it included those that would have left before that did not reach the 2 years, now suddenly became qualified for a refund. But they've long gone, and the addresses, some of the addresses are not available. So there is a project going on to analyze like bits of the data that are missing. And I think one of the key things that was found in that report was that there were missing bits like addresses, and a lot of them were duplicate records as well. So the key recommendations that ITM have made is to, first of all, to tackle the duplicate records, like where there are several records for the same person, put them together. So that will be a project going forward to amalgamate those and to use the same process for the address tracing, because it was successful in the other case, to use that same address tracing to find the addresses for the others.
Okay, that's so we really see this as an ongoing process.
It is an ongoing process, yes.
Okay, do members have any questions for Yvonne on the administration report, please? I'm not seeing any. Oh, Philip.
It isn't really a question, more an observation, Chairman, really. I think whilst we're in part one, obviously we've got major concerns, and we do need to express those in the public part of the report. Part two will go into more of what we're going to try and do about that. But I think it's been hugely disappointing to see the deterioration in performance over time with Surrey. We knew that initially with Capital there were major problems, and we thought we were onto a much better thing, but it really does seem to have nosedived, and it's had a major impact on our members, our current, past, deferred members, and we really need to rectify that. So I'll look forward to the discussion later on about how we can try and take that forward. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. That's something that we do need to pick up in the part two segment of this agenda, and we should do so. Great. Any other questions for Yvonne on the administration report, please? I'm not seeing anything. Okay, so we have two resolutions in this respect. Firstly, that the committee note the report, and secondly, that we approve the proposal to increase the threshold for writing off the overpayment of pensions. Once again, as this is a decision, can I have a proposer and a seconder for those? Philip, thank you, proposer. And John, second. Oh, John just beat you, Tony.
John seconded. Okay.
So John seconding. Are all members all in favour of those resolutions?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so those are passed. So then we move to item 10 on the agenda, please. That's the pension fund conflict of interest policy. And this one is over to you again, Yvonne, I think, please. Yvonne, I don't think we can hear you. We can't hear you.
So, Yvonne, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. This report is asking the committee to approve a conflict of interest policy for the pension board. Now, the governance advisors, Aon, were asked to look at how the pension fund complied with Code of Practice 14. And one of the areas that they identified as a shortfall was that a specific conflict of interest policy for the board was not in place. So one has been drafted. It has been seen by the board in February for them to comment upon, and then it is now being brought today for the committee to approve. It mainly helps the board to identify what a conflict of interest is and how conflicts of interest will be monitored and how they will be managed. If I may point out on page 167, it's the first paragraph, 4.4. There is a floating line there, which I'm proposing to delete. It's kind of a half-finished sentence just hanging. Yes, and then the paragraph after that, 4.4, is the 4.4 that should remain. And then in paragraph 4.5, where it says any individual who considers that they have a potential or actual conflict of interest which relates to an item of business at a meeting must advise the chair of the pension board. I would like to insert in there, and the chief accountant, prior to the meeting. So just and the chief accountant to be inserted there.
Okay.
And those are the changes that I'm proposing.
Okay. So any questions for Yvonne on this new conflict of interest policy, which is really very much aimed rather than the committee, I must emphasize. Any questions, anyone? I don't see anything. So the resolution with this point is that the committee approves the conflicts of interest policy for implementation. May I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Philip. Seconder. Thank you, Tony. Everyone in favour on the committee? Yes. Thank you very much. So that is passed. So item 11, the communications policy review. Yvonne, can you do this one, please?
Thank you, Councillor. The last communication strategy was approved by the Council in June 2017. It is required to be updated every 3 years. The communication strategy, it speaks about who the fund will communicate with and the method of communication with the different groups. There have been no major changes to the communication strategy because there has been no regulatory changes that would affect it. So it's mainly like bringing it up to date, changing the contact names because officers have changed over time. So the contact names at the end have been changed, and the links, making sure that the links are, the electronic links are pointing to the right areas. So some of those have been changed, and an area which was considered to be redundant, which spoke about the previous administrator's capita, that has been removed from it. And just various updates for government departments that have changed, but the substance of it remains the same.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. Any questions from members for Yvonne on the communications policy? I don't see anything. So, so the resolution is that the committee approves the communication strategy for the London Borough of Hillingdon Pension Fund. Proposer, please. Thank you, Philip. Seconder, please.
I'm seconding, Chair. I'm sorry about the communication.
Not a problem, John. Thank you very much. Everyone in favour?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So that is approved.
Thank you.
So we now move to item 12 on the agenda, which is the risk register. And we do have a couple of modifications to the existing register. So James, can I turn this over to you, please?
Thank you. Risk register has been sort of updated in consultation with Councillor Goddard, and back in March we actually added a new risk relating to business continuity and COVID-19. I'm highlighting it again because obviously March committee was cancelled, so just to let you know that this is a new risk. However, since being added in March, we've moved on slightly, and home working and systems have all been set up. So we've reduced the risk that was on there in March and brought it down, but we've still included it for business continuity. Pen 1, market value of investments, has been upgraded. This has been increased to reflect the potential loss of investments. As we saw in March, assets fell by 137 million. Although things have settled down, we're obviously not out of the woods when it comes to COVID. So bearing in mind the magnitude of change, we've made that a red risk and put it as due to the high impact of the potential change. Pen 4, relating to inflation, government intervention and low interest rates provide the perfect mix to generate high inflation. And as such, we thought that there should be an increased risk on the risk register relating to this, so that has been upgraded. Also, comments around administration on Pen 7 have been updated, but again, we'll talk about more about that in part 2. And Pen 3, the buyout of KPMG by ISIO has also just been updated. Basically, we've seen no issues in terms of service delivery, so that's just to say everything's sort of running smoothly on that. And those are the main changes on the risk register.
Thank you, James. Any comments or questions from the committee for James about the risk register? Sorry, John, were you indicating? No, Tony. We can't hear you, Tony. I think that was he's walked away from the screen, so I guess we continue. Okay, so if there are no comments or questions on that, resolution is that Tony, are you back and can you make yourself heard? No. Resolution is that the committee has considered the risk register in terms of the approach, the specific risks identified, and the measures taken to mitigate those risks. Can I have a proposer for that, please?
Mr. Chairman, I propose.
Thank you, John. And Philip, you're seconding? Thank you. So can we consider that that resolution passed, everybody? Thank you very much. Thank you. So then we move to item 13 on the agenda, the draft work programme. Yvonne, can I turn this over to you, please?
Thank you, Councillor. Well, for October 29th is written on the report. If I think Councillor Goddard updated me on that. It's actually October the 28th, so that will be changed to the next date of the meeting, October 28th. And also an update on the McLeod judgment will be added to that meeting as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Any comments or questions on the work programme, please? No, I don't see any. So the resolutions are that the committee notes the date for future committee meetings, and that the committee makes suggestions for future agenda items, working practices, and or reviews. At this stage, can I just, as far as suggestions, can I just make a couple of suggestions? I think what has proved helpful this time around has been actually taking the training segment outside the committee meeting. And if committee members agree, I'd like to suggest that we continue that practice going forward, if that meets with the approval of the committee. The other point to say is that I think we did have a resolution at our January meeting that responsible investment would appear on our agenda as a discrete item going forward. We do actually have an IT item in part 2 called ESG, I suggest that we relabel that as responsible investment going forward. But subject to those, I'm looking for a proposer and a seconder to the resolution proposed by you. Do I have a seconder, please? Tony, are you seconding, or are you battling with your hardware? Can I have a seconder, please? John, are you seconding?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
I second.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I believe we can consider that passed committee, can we? Thank you
Yep,
very much.
that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes part 1 of the agenda. So we'll now move to part 2 of the meeting, and the live stream to YouTube will now be terminated. So thank you for all who have been watching.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. If I can just ask everybody to remain on mute. It will take us a few seconds because the YouTube stream is always running a bit behind. So if you can just bear with us, and I'll let you know when we're okay to go into the part 2.